The courtroom doors crashed open with the violence of judgment itself, and Serafina Valtieri stepped forward into a sea of hostile eyes and rustling silk, her auburn hair blazing like wildfire against the somber gray of accusation, her emerald gown clinging to her frame as though armored for war. In that suspended heartbeat, where every barbed whisper from the gallery and every calculating glance from Count Darius Zoltan across the divided aisle threatened to tear their fragile union to shreds, the entire weight of scandal, legacy, and forbidden love balanced on the edge of ruin. If this raw collision of passion and peril has already claimed you, subscribe now. The revelations waiting beyond this moment will shatter every expectation you hold. The carriage rattled over the final stretch of the coastal road like a creature in its death throes, wheels grinding against wet stone as though the very earth resented its passage. Inside, Serafina Valtieri sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, spine straight despite the ache that had settled between her shoulder blades after 12 hours of travel. Her auburn hair, caught in a simple traveling knot, had begun to escape in soft tendrils that framed her face. High cheekbones, full mouth, eyes the color of winter seas before a storm. She wore the same emerald traveling gown she had worn for 3 days, its once rich velvet now dulled by dust and damp, yet somehow it still carried an air of quiet defiance, as though the garment itself refused to surrender to circumstance. Through the small window she watched the landscape change. The open salt marshes gave way to rising ground, then to dense woodland that pressed close against the road. The fog rolled in thicker here, swallowing the tops of the pines and turning the world into shades of silver and slate. Somewhere ahead lay Ravencrest Manor, the ancestral seat of Count Darius Zoltan, and her new employment as governess to his 8-year-old ward Mira. Serafina had accepted the position with the grim pragmatism of someone who had already lost everything worth grieving. The letter from the Count's steward had arrived 3 weeks earlier, terse and formal, room board, £40 per annum, and the expectation of complete discretion. She had replied the same day. There had been no other offers. Her sister Lyrian waited in a small boarding house in Port Vera, the last of their funds dwindling like sand through fingers. Lyrian's lungs were weak, had been since the winter fever 3 years ago, and every physician agreed the sea air was poison to her. Inland, in the sheltered hills of Eldoria, the climate might give her a chance. £40 a year would pay for a decent room, coal in winter, and a physician who did not bleed his patients for sport. It was enough. It had to be enough. The carriage lurched to a halt. Serafina drew a slow breath and smoothed her skirts. She had practiced this moment in her mind during the long journey, chin up, voice calm, no trace of the desperation that lived beneath her ribs. She was 24 years old, educated, capable, and utterly without illusions. That would have to suffice. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine resin and wet earth. A footman in dark livery offered his gloved hand. Serafina took it and stepped down onto gravel that crunched like broken glass. Ravencrest Manor rose before her, vast and brooding, its central block flanked by 2 mismatched wings that suggested centuries of ambitious additions and hasty repairs. The stone was dark granite, almost black in the failing light, streaked with lichen and moss. Tall windows stared down like unblinking eyes. A single tower rose at the northwest corner, its conical roof lost in mist. A woman waited at the top of the wide steps, middle-aged, thin-lipped, dressed in severe black bombazine. The housekeeper, Mrs. Calder. Miss Valtieri? The voice was clipped, efficient. Yes. Follow me. The child is waiting. No welcome. No pleasantries. Serafina was accustomed to both absences. She followed Mrs. Calder through double doors of carved oak into a great hall that smelled of beeswax and old fires. Tapestries hung on every wall, their colors muted by time, hunting scenes, battles, stern-faced ancestors in ruffs and armor. A massive fireplace yawned at the far end, empty now, its stone blackened by generations of smoke. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant tick of a long case clock. They climbed a wide staircase of dark oak, turned left down a corridor lined with closed doors, then right again. Mrs. Calder stopped before a pair of double doors painted cream and gold. This is the East Wing nursery suite. Your chamber adjoins the schoolroom. Meals will be brought to you here unless the Count requests your presence in the dining hall. You will take your orders from me or from his lordship directly. Is that understood? Perfectly. Mrs. Calder opened the door. The schoolroom was surprisingly bright. High windows overlooking the rear gardens, shelves of books, a globe, a pianoforte, an easel. In the center stood a small girl with hair the color of ripe wheat, dressed in pale blue mourning. She clutched a rag doll to her chest as though it were armor. "Mira," Mrs. Calder said, "this is Miss Valtieri, your new governess." The child looked up. Her eyes were large, gray, and startlingly direct. She did not smile. "Hello," Serafina said softly, crouching to the girl's level. "I'm very pleased to meet you." Mira studied her for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Do you know stories?" "I know many." "About dragons?" "Especially about dragons." Something flickered in the child's expression, interest, perhaps hope. She nodded once, small and solemn. Mrs. Calder cleared her throat. "Dinner will be served in an hour. The Count dines at 7. You are not expected tonight. Tomorrow you will begin lessons at 9 sharp." She left without another word. Serafina turned back to Mira. "Shall we see your room?" The nursery bedroom was small but comfortable, a 4-poster bed with faded rose silk hangings, a washstand, a wardrobe, a window seat overlooking the same gardens. Myra's doll collection occupied one shelf, porcelain faces with glassy stares. On the night table sat a framed miniature of a young woman who must have been Myra's mother, smiling in a way that suggested she had never imagined dying at 31. Serafina knelt beside the child. "This is your space," she said. "You may keep it exactly as you like. I will not move anything without asking." Myra's fingers tightened on the doll. They moved Mama's things. "After." The words landed like stones in still water. "I'm sorry," Serafina said, meaning it. "I won't do that." Mira nodded again, a tiny gesture. Then she offered the doll. "This is Lilibet. She doesn't like thunder." Serafina accepted the offering carefully. "Then we shall make sure she feels safe when it storms." For the first time, Myra's mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but close. They spent the next hour unpacking Serafina's single trunk. Mira watched with grave attention as books were placed on the shelf, dresses hung in the wardrobe, a small wooden box containing Lyrian's letters set on the writing desk. When Serafina lifted out the last item, a worn copy of Tales of the Eastern Marches, Myra's eyes widened. "You really do have dragon stories." "I do. Would you like one now?" Mira hesitated, then climbed onto the window seat and patted the cushion beside her. Serafina sat. She opened the book to a familiar page and began to read in a low, steady voice about the dragon of Mount Vere, who guarded a hoard of starlight. Mira listened with fierce concentration, hugging Lilibet close. When the story ended, the room had grown dim. A maid brought candles and a supper tray, cold chicken, bread, cheese, stewed apples. Mira ate neatly, watching Serafina the entire time. After the meal, Serafina helped the child into her nightgown and tucked her into bed. She left the candle burning low. "Good night, Mira." "Good night, Miss Valtieri." At the door, Serafina paused. "You may call me Sarah, if you like. When we are alone." Mira considered this. "Sarah," she tested. Then, very softly, "Thank you." Serafina closed the door quietly and crossed to her own small chamber. It was simply furnished, a narrow bed, a washstand, a chair, a writing desk beneath the window. On the desk lay a folded note in precise, masculine script. "Miss Valtieri. You will find the library open until midnight should you require reading material. Lessons begin promptly at 9. My ward's education has been neglected, I expect marked improvement. D. Zoltan. No greeting. No signature flourish. Only the name, stark and final. Serafina set the note aside. She washed her face in cold water, changed into her nightdress, and sat at the desk to write to Lyrian. My dearest, I have arrived safely. The manor is grand and quiet. Mira is a thoughtful child, hungry for stories. The Count is distant, but the position is secure. I will send money as soon as wages are paid. Tell the landlady I will pay the next quarter in full by month's end. I miss you more than words can hold. Sarah. She sealed the letter, blew out the candle, and lay in the narrow bed listening to the house breathe around her. Somewhere deep in the building, a clock struck 10. Distant footsteps echoed along corridors. A door closed softly. Serafina turned onto her side, staring into the dark. She thought of Lyrian's thin shoulders, the cough that worsened every winter, the way her sister's eyes lit when she spoke of the sea she could no longer bear to smell. £40 a year. A roof. A chance. It would be enough. Sleep came slowly, reluctant, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and old books, and the whisper of something larger stirring beneath the surface of the house, something watchful, something waiting. In the small hours, when the fog pressed thick against the window panes, Serafina woke to the sound of footsteps outside her door. Slow. Deliberate. They paused, then moved on. She sat up, heart beating hard. Silence returned. She told herself it was a servant making rounds, or the house settling, or her own nerves playing tricks. Still, she did not sleep again that night. At dawn the fog had burned away, revealing gardens laid out in formal symmetry, box hedges, gravel paths, a fountain whose basin was crusted with lichen. Serafina dressed quickly, braided her hair, and went to wake Mira.
The child was already up, sitting on the window seat with Lilibet, watching the light change on the roses. "Did you sleep?" Serafina asked. Mira shook her head. "I dreamed about Mama. She was standing in the garden, but when I tried to reach her, the fog took her." Serafina knelt beside her. "Dreams can be cruel, but they are only dreams." Mira looked at her with those grave gray eyes. "Are you afraid of anything?" "Many things," Serafina admitted, "but I try not to let them win." Mira considered this. "I'm afraid of being forgotten." The confession was so quiet it almost disappeared into the morning air. Serafina took the child's small hand. "Then we shall make sure you are remembered. Every day. In stories, in lessons, in laughter. You will not be forgotten, Mira. I promise." Myra's fingers curled around hers, tentative but real. Breakfast was served in the nursery. Porridge with honey, fresh milk, sliced apple. While Mira ate, Serafina reviewed the books on the shelves. The selection was eclectic. Latin primers, French grammars, volumes of natural philosophy, poetry, and surprisingly, several volumes of Eastern folktales bound in red leather. She selected one and opened it at random. A woodcut illustration showed a dragon coiled around a mountain peak, wings spread like storm clouds. Mira leaned over. "That's the one from last night." "So it is." They spent the morning reading together. Mira read haltingly but with growing confidence, stumbling over unfamiliar words, brightening when she got them right. Serafina corrected gently, praised lavishly, and felt something loosen in her chest, a small, cautious hope. At noon Mrs. Calder appeared with a message. The Count wished to see the new governess in the library at 1:30. Serafina's pulse quickened. She changed into her second-best gown, charcoal gray wool, high-necked, unadorned, and brushed her hair until it shone. Mira watched the preparations with solemn interest. "Are you nervous?" the child asked. "A little," Serafina admitted. "Don't be. Uncle Darius looks fierce, but he's only quiet." Serafina smiled despite herself. "Thank you for the warning." At 1:30 she descended the main staircase alone, following Mrs. Calder's directions, through the great hall, down the west corridor, past a portrait gallery, to a pair of tall doors inlaid with ebony and silver. She knocked once. A low voice answered, "Enter." Serafina pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The library of Ravencrest Manor was breathtaking. 3 stories of shelves climbed toward a domed ceiling painted with constellations. Rolling ladders ran along brass rails. A fire burned in a marble fireplace carved with vines and dragons. The air smelled of leather, ink, and old paper. And at the center of it all, behind a massive desk of dark mahogany, sat Count Darius Zoltan. He did not rise. He was taller than she had expected, even-seated, broad-shouldered, dressed in severe black with only a white shirt and stock for contrast. His skin was warm olive, his hair black as midnight, swept back from a high forehead. His eyes were obsidian, deep, unreadable, and fixed on her with unnerving intensity. "Miss Valtieri," he said. The voice was low, measured, carrying the faint accent of the eastern provinces. "Your lordship." He gestured to the chair opposite the desk. She sat. He studied her for a long moment, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You come with excellent references," he said at last. "And yet your previous positions were all of short duration." Serafina met his gaze steadily. "The families either relocated or no longer required my services. Or found your methods unconventional." She lifted one brow. "I teach children to think, my lord, not merely to recite. Some parents find that distinction troubling." A ghost of something, amusement, flickered in those dark eyes. Myra's previous governess preferred recitation. She lasted 3 months. The child stopped speaking for 2 weeks afterward. Serafina's heart twisted. "I understand. Do you? I lost my own parents young. Silence is sometimes the only safe answer." He regarded her with new interest. "You will have complete authority in matters of education," he said. "I require daily reports. Progress, difficulties, observations. I do not tolerate surprises." "Understood." He leaned back, fingers drumming once on the desk. "You are not what I expected." "Nor you, my lord." The corner of his mouth lifted, the smallest possible movement. "You will find the library open to you after 10 o'clock each evening, should you require additional material. Do not disturb the desk or the upper galleries without permission." "I will not." He nodded once. "You are dismissed." Serafina rose, curtsied, and turned to leave. "Miss Valtieri." She paused at the door. He had not moved, but his voice carried across the room like a physical touch. "Do not mistake my silence for indifference. I notice everything." She looked back over her shoulder, meeting those obsidian eyes. "Then you will notice that I am here to teach your ward, not to entertain you, my lord." For the first time he smiled, small, sharp, genuine. "We shall see." She closed the door behind her and stood for a moment in the corridor, heart hammering. The house seemed quieter now, as though it had been listening. Serafina lifted her chin and walked back toward the east wing. She had survived worse than a brooding count and his ledgers. She would survive this too. But deep inside, where hope and fear tangled like roots, something new stirred. Something dangerous. Something alive. The days at Ravencrest settled into a rhythm that felt almost fragile, like the thin crust of ice that forms over a winter pond, beautiful, deceptive, and liable to crack with the slightest pressure. Serafina rose each morning before dawn, when the house still held its breath. She dressed quickly in the chill of her small chamber, braided her auburn hair with practiced efficiency, and slipped into the nursery to find Mira already awake more often than not. The child had taken to sitting on the window seat with Lilibet, watching the first pale light touch the gardens as though waiting for something, or someone, to appear. Their mornings were quiet, deliberate. Breakfast in the nursery. Warm porridge laced with cinnamon, fresh milk, slices of apple or pear when the kitchen could spare them. Serafina ate little, her appetite blunted by the constant awareness that every day here was a transaction. Her labor for Lyrian's survival. Lessons began at 9 sharp. The schoolroom became their sanctuary. Serafina arranged the day with care. Reading first because Mira loved stories and stories opened doors. Then arithmetic because numbers were honest and could not lie. Then French because the Count had specified fluency. then natural philosophy because the child's curiosity burned brightest when she could touch the why of things. Mira was bright, sharper than her previous governess had ever allowed her to be. She devoured the dragon tales, then asked questions that spiraled outward. How do dragons breathe fire? Why do mountains smoke? Could a girl ride one? Serafina answered honestly, drawing from memory and the red-bound volumes on the shelf, sometimes inventing when the truth ran thin. Mira listened with the fierce attention of someone who had learned early that adults could vanish without warning. One morning, a week into her employment, Mira asked a different question. Why don't you talk about your family? Serafina paused, chalk hovering above the slate where she had been drawing the orbit of the moon. I have a sister, she said carefully. Her name is Lyrian. She is 12. Is she sick? Serafina lowered the chalk. Yes. Her lungs. The sea air makes it worse. Mira nodded solemnly. Mama's lungs hurt too. At the end, the silence that followed was heavy, shared. Serafina reached across the table and touched the back of Myra's small hand. I'm sorry. Mira turned her hand over and curled her fingers around Serafina's. Me too. That small gesture, the first time Mira had reached out unprompted, felt like a crack of light through a long-closed door. Afternoons were for walking. The gardens of Ravencrest were vast and formal, laid out in the old style. Geometric parterres of box and lavender, gravel paths that wound between rose arbors, a long reflecting pool where carp moved like slow shadows beneath the surface. Serafina and Mira walked daily regardless of weather, because fresh air was medicine and movement was distraction. On the 10th day they discovered the dragon fountain. It stood half-hidden behind a yew hedge, a bronze sculpture of a coiled serpent dragon, wings half-spread, mouth open in eternal roar. Water once poured from the jaws, now only a trickle emerged, green with algae. Mira stopped dead. It's like the one in the book, she whispered. Serafina knelt beside her. Almost. This one is older. Look, see the weathering on the scales? Centuries, perhaps. Mira reached out, tentative, and traced one bronze wing. Does he have a name? Everything old has a name, Serafina said. We just have to find it. They named him Varys that afternoon, after the dragon of Mount Vare. Mira declared he was guardian of the garden, and from then on every walk included a stop at the fountain to report the day's events to the bronze sentinel. Serafina found herself watching the child more closely after that. Myra's grief was quiet, contained, but it colored everything. The way she clung to Lilibet during thunderstorms, the way she asked the same questions about her mother's last days as though hoping for a different answer. Serafina answered each time with the same gentle honesty, never rushing, never lying. She knew too well the damage a comforting falsehood could do. Evenings belonged to the reports. Every night after Mira was in bed, Serafina sat at the small writing desk and composed the daily summary for the Count. She wrote with precision. Lessons completed, progress noted, difficulties observed. She never embellished. She never flattered. The first week's reports were returned unmarked. The second week, a single word appeared in the margin of one page, written in the same precise hand that had greeted her on arrival. Satisfactory. It felt like a victory. On the evening of the 12th day, Serafina ventured to the library after 10 o'clock. The house was silent save for the distant creak of settling timbers. She carried a single candle, shielding the flame with her palm as she walked the long corridors. The library door stood slightly ajar, a thin line of warm light spilling into the hallway. She pushed them open quietly. The room was even more magnificent by firelight. Flames danced in the marble hearth, casting shadows across the towering shelves. The constellations on the domed ceiling seemed to shimmer, as though the painted stars breathed. Serafina moved deeper inside, drawn to the shelves nearest the fire. She ran her fingers along the spines, leather, vellum, cloth, titles and languages she recognized and some she did not. She selected a slim volume on Eastern mythology, intending only to borrow it for tomorrow's lesson. A soft rustle made her freeze. Across the room, half hidden behind the desk, Count Darius Zoltan sat in a high-backed chair, a ledger open before him. He had not been there when she entered, or if he had, she had not seen him. He did not look up. "You are late," he said. Serafina's heart lurched. "I beg your pardon, my lord. I did not realize the library was occupied." "The library is never occupied after 10, he replied, still writing. "It is merely used." She stood motionless, candle trembling slightly in her hand. He set down his pen at last and lifted his head. The firelight carved his features into sharp relief. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes like polished obsidian reflecting flame. "You have been here 12 days, he said. "Yes, my lord. Mira speaks of dragons. She enjoys the stories. She has not spoken of dragons since her mother died." Serafina swallowed. "Children return to what comforts them when they are ready." He studied her with that unnerving intensity. "You write detailed reports." "I was instructed to." "You write them as though you expect them to be read by someone who cares about the content, not merely the compliance." She lifted her chin. "I write them for Myra's sake." A long silence. Then, unexpectedly, "Sit." It was not a request. Serafina hesitated, then crossed the room and took the chair opposite the desk. She set the candle down carefully, keeping her posture straight. He leaned back, fingers steepled. "You are not what I expected," he said again, echoing his words from their first meeting. "You have said so before. I am saying it again because it continues to be true." She waited. "You do not simper. You do not flatter. You do not pretend to be invisible." "I am a governess, my lord. Invisibility is part of the position." "Yet you refuse it." "I refuse only what diminishes the child in my care." His gaze flicked to the book she had chosen, then back to her face. "You read Eastern tales to her." "I do." "Why?" "Because they are beautiful. Because they teach courage. Because they remind her that the world is larger than this house and her grief." He was silent for so long she thought the conversation had ended. Then he reached into a drawer and withdrew a slim, black-bound ledger, different from the others on his desk. This one was worn, the edges frayed, the leather darkened by years of handling. He opened it to a marked page and slid it across the desk. Serafina looked down. Columns, names, numbers, annotations in his precise hand. Lady Arabella Thorne, 18,000 per annum. Connections to the Admiralty, temperament, compliant. Miss Celestine de Vire, 22,000 Eastern trade interests, temperament, reserved. Lady Isolde Marwood, 30,000, ancient title, temperament, ambitious. A list of potential brides. Each name ranked, weighed, measured. Serafina felt heat rise in her cheeks, not embarrassment but something closer to anger. "You keep a ledger of wives," she said quietly. "I keep a ledger of what is necessary to preserve this estate. And love. Love is a luxury I cannot afford." She met his eyes. "And yet you allow me to fill your ward's head with stories of impossible things." "Stories are safe," he said. "They end. Reality does not." Serafina looked back at the page. At the bottom, in fresher ink, a single line had been added. Miss Serafina Valtieri, governess, no dowry, temperament, impertinent. The words stared up at her. She laughed, a short, surprised sound. He raised one brow. "You have misspelled impertinent," she said. "There are two N's." For a heartbeat, the fire was the only sound. Then Darius Zoltan laughed, low, genuine, startling in its warmth. The sound changed something in the room, as though a door long closed had been cracked open. He closed the ledger with deliberate care. "You may keep the mythology book," he said. "Return it when you are finished." Serafina stood. "Thank you, my lord." She turned to leave. "Miss Valtieri." She paused. "Do not mistake my silence for indifference," he said again. This time she smiled, small, careful, real. "I won't." She walked out of the library with the book clutched to her chest, heart beating too fast. The house felt different now. Warmer. More dangerous. That night she dreamed of dragons, not the bronze guardian in the garden, but a living one, black-scaled and obsidian-eyed, coiled around a mountain of ledgers that burned without flame. She woke before dawn, breathless, and knew that something had shifted irrevocably. The next morning Mira greeted her with a question. "Did you see Uncle Darius last night?" Serafina's hand stilled on the porridge spoon. "Why do you ask?" "I heard him laugh," Mira said simply. "He hasn't laughed since Mama died." Serafina looked at the child for a long moment. Then she smiled. Perhaps he remembered how. Mira smiled back, small, tentative but real. And in that moment, Serafina understood that the legacy she had come to protect was not only the child's future. It was the man's heart as well. And she was not sure which one frightened her more. The rain came without warning on the 17th night. It began as a low mutter against the roof, then grew into a steady roar that swallowed every other sound. Lightning flickered behind the heavy curtains of the nursery, turning the room into a series of frozen tableaus. Mira curled beneath her quilt clutching Lilibet, Serafina sitting beside the bed with a candle shielded by her palm, the dragon fountain outside visible only as a dark, glistening shape when the sky split open. Myra's breathing had quickened with each flash. "I hate thunder," she whispered for the third time. Serafina smoothed the child's hair. "I know. But Varys is out there. He's very large and very old. Thunder doesn't frighten him." Myra's small fingers twisted in the quilt. "Does he eat it?" "Sometimes," Serafina said. "Sometimes he just roars back louder." Another flash. The room blazed white. Thunder followed so close the window panes rattled. Mira whimpered. Serafina made a decision. "Come," she said softly. "We'll go somewhere safer." She lifted Mira, quilt and all, into her arms. The child was light, fragile-boned, yet clung with surprising strength. Serafina carried her through the darkened nursery corridor, past her own chamber, down the narrow servant's stair, and into the main house. The great hall was empty, lit only by the banked embers in the massive fireplace. Serafina did not stop. She moved deeper into the west wing toward the library. She told herself it was the closest warm room with a good fire. She told herself Mira needed distraction. She did not admit, even to herself, that she had been thinking of the library every night since that first late encounter, replaying the sound of Darius Zoltan's rare laugh in the dark corners of her mind. The double doors stood closed tonight, but a thin line of golden light showed beneath them. Someone was inside. Serafina hesitated. Mira lifted her head from Serafina's shoulder. "Is it Uncle Darius?" "I think so." The child considered this. "He won't be angry. Not if I'm with you." Serafina felt a pang she could not name. She knocked once, softly. Pause. Then, "Enter." The voice was low, almost lost beneath the storm. Serafina pushed the door open with her shoulder. The library looked different tonight. The fire had been built high. Flames leaped in the hearth, casting long shadows across the shelves. Darius Zoltan sat in the same high-backed chair, but the ledger before him was closed. A glass of amber liquid rested at his elbow. He wore only a black silk waistcoat over his white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, collar open at the throat. His hair was slightly disordered, as though he had run his hands through it. He looked up. His gaze moved first to Mira, then to Serafina holding her, then, slowly, back to Serafina's face. Lightning flashed again. The room flared white for an instant, illuminating the surprise in his expression before thunder rolled over them. Mira lifted her head. "Uncle Darius, there's thunder." "I heard it," he said quietly. Serafina felt suddenly exposed, standing in the center of his private domain in her night wrapper and shawl, hair loose down her back, carrying his ward like a shield. "I apologize," she began. "Mira is frightened of storms. I thought the firelight." He raised a hand, stopping her. "Bring her here." Serafina crossed the room. Darius stood. For the first time she realized how truly tall he was, broad-shouldered, long-limbed, moving with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to command. He took Mira from her arms without hesitation, settling the child on his hip as though he had done it 1,000 times. Mira wrapped her arms around his neck. Varys isn't afraid, she told him solemnly. Who is Varys? The dragon in the garden. Sarah says he roars back at thunder. Darius glanced at Seraphina over Myra's head. One dark brow rose. Does he indeed? Seraphina felt heat rise in her cheeks. It comforts her. He studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he carried Mira to the fireside chair and sat, settling her across his knees. He reached for the blanket folded over the arm and draped it around her shoulders. Tell me about this dragon, he said. Myra's eyes widened. You want to hear? I want to hear. The child looked at Seraphina, seeking permission. Seraphina nodded once. Mira began, halting at first, then with growing confidence. She told of Varys, the ancient guardian of the garden, who had slept for centuries beneath the fountain until the day she and Sarah found him. She described his bronze scales, his wings that caught the light, his roar that answered every storm. Darius listened without interruption, one large hand resting protectively on Myra's back. When she finished, the room was quiet save for the crackle of the fire and the steady drum of rain. Darius looked at Seraphina again. You have a gift for stories. I have a gift for remembering them, she corrected gently. He inclined his head. Mira yawned, suddenly heavy-eyed. Time for bed, Seraphina said. Darius stood carefully, still holding the child. I'll carry her. He walked with them back through the corridors, Myra's head resting against his shoulder. Lightning continued to flicker, but the thunder had moved farther away. At the nursery door he paused. Seraphina took Mira from him, their hands brushing for the briefest instant. His skin was warm, hers felt suddenly cold. Good night, Uncle Darius, Mira murmured sleepily. Good night, little dragon tamer. He watched as Seraphina carried Mira inside and settled her into bed. When the child was tucked in and breathing evenly, Seraphina returned to the corridor. Darius had not moved. He stood with arms folded, silhouetted against the faint light from the hall sconces. You should not have come to the library, he said quietly. I know. Yet you did. The child was frightened. And you chose my library over the nursery hearth. Seraphina lifted her chin. It was the warmest room I knew. A beat of silence. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could smell cedar and ink and the faint bite of brandy on his breath. You are not what governesses are supposed to be, he said. And you are not what reclusive noblemen are supposed to be. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then rose again. You speak to me as though we are equals. Are we not both trying to keep a child from breaking? She asked softly. He studied her face as though memorizing it. Tomorrow, he said, I will be away until evening. Business in Eldenport. I will keep Mira occupied. He nodded once. Then, without warning, he reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers lingered a fraction longer than necessary. You should go to bed, Miss Valtieri. The words were quiet, almost gentle. But the way he said her name, low, deliberate, made something inside her clench. Good night, my lord. She turned and slipped into the nursery, closing the door softly behind her. She leaned against it for a long moment, heart pounding. Outside, she heard his footsteps retreat down the corridor, slow, measured, reluctant. Sleep was impossible. She sat at her writing desk, candle guttering, and stared at the blank page meant for tomorrow's report. Instead, she wrote one line. He laughed again tonight. She stared at the words until the ink blurred. Then she blew out the candle and lay in the dark, listening to the storm move away and the house settle into uneasy silence. The next day dawned gray and dripping. Darius left before breakfast. Seraphina heard the carriage wheels crunch over gravel as she helped Mira dress. The child seemed lighter today, as though the previous night had loosened something inside her. They spent the morning in the schoolroom, then ventured into the sodden gardens after lunch. The dragon fountain gleamed wetly. Mira ran ahead to tell Varys about the thunder and how Uncle Darius had listened to the whole story. Seraphina followed more slowly, skirts dragging in the damp grass. She felt restless, unsettled. Every time she closed her eyes she saw his fingers brushing her cheek, heard the way he said her name. Dangerous. Foolish. She was a governess. He was a count with ledgers full of brides who came with fortunes and titles. Yet the memory of his rare laugh, of the way he had held Mira with instinctive gentleness, refused to fade. That evening, after Mira was in bed, Seraphina returned to the library. She told herself she only wanted another book. She told herself the room would be empty. The doors were closed. She knocked once. Silence. She pushed them open. The fire had burned low. Darius Zoltan was not at his desk. He stood at the tall window overlooking the gardens, hands clasped behind his back, staring into the darkness. He did not turn. "You are late again," he said. "I didn't expect you back so soon." The roads were worse than anticipated. She stepped inside, closing the doors behind her. The room felt smaller tonight. Warmer. He turned at last. In the dim firelight his eyes looked almost black. "You have not written tonight's report." "I have not." "Why?" "Because I don't know what to say." He crossed the room slowly. "Say what happened." She swallowed. "Mira was frightened of the storm. We came here. You listened to her story. She fell asleep in your arms. You carried her to bed. You touched my hair. You stopped a pace away. And I have been thinking about it ever since." A long silence. Then he asked very quietly, "Do you regret it?" "No." He exhaled, a sound that might have been relief. "Then we are both in trouble." Serafina looked up at him. Lightning flickered once more, distant now, a final echo of the storm. In that brief flash she saw everything in his face. Hunger, caution, something that looked dangerously close to hope. She took one step forward. He took one step back. "My lord." "Darius," he corrected, voice rough. "When we are alone." "Darius." He closed his eyes at the sound of his name on her lips. Then he opened them again. "Serafina." The word was almost a plea. She closed the distance. Neither of them moved to touch the other. They simply stood, inches apart, breathing the same air, the fire crackling softly behind them. Outside, the rain began again, gentler this time, a steady murmur against the windows. Inside, something irrevocable had begun. The days following the storm carried a deceptive calm, as though the house itself had decided to hold its breath. Serafina moved through the routine with deliberate care, lessons, walks, reports, yet every moment felt edged with awareness. She noticed things she had not permitted herself to notice before. The way Darius's footsteps sounded different in the corridors now, slower, more deliberate. The way his gaze lingered when he passed Mira in the hall. The way the library doors stood slightly ajar every evening after 10 o'clock, an unspoken invitation she had so far resisted. She told herself it was prudence. She told herself she was protecting Mira. But in the quiet hours after midnight, when the house slept and only the wind moved through the eaves, she admitted the truth to herself. She was afraid of what would happen if she crossed that threshold again. On the morning of the 23rd day, Lady Serafina Kale arrived. The announcement came with the arrival of a gleaming black carriage drawn by 4 matched bays, its panels emblazoned with the Kale crest, a silver falcon clutching a laurel branch. Servants hurried down the steps. Mrs. Calder appeared in her severest black, lips pressed into a line of disapproval. Serafina watched from the nursery window as the lady descended, tall, porcelain-skinned, dressed in dove-gray traveling silk trimmed with sable. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate chignon beneath a feathered hat. Her posture was perfect, practiced, aristocratic. She moved like someone who had never once questioned her right to occupy any space she entered. Mira pressed her nose to the glass. "Who is that?" "Your uncle's cousin," Serafina answered, keeping her voice neutral. "Lady Serafina Kale." Mira wrinkled her nose. "She looks like a statue. She is very elegant." The child considered this. "I like you better." Serafina smiled despite the sudden tightness in her chest. "Thank you, little dragon tamer." Downstairs the house shifted. Footmen carried trunks. Maids bustled. Mrs. Calder's voice carried sharp instructions along the corridors. By luncheon, Lady Kale had been installed in the South Wing's best guest suite, and the dining hall was set for 3. The summons came at 12:30. Mrs. Calder appeared at the nursery door, expression carefully blank. "His lordship requests your presence at luncheon, Miss Valtieri. Mira will eat in the nursery today." Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. She had never been asked to dine with the Count before. She dressed quickly in her charcoal gray wool, her best remaining gown, though it was now 2 seasons old, and pinned her auburn hair into a low knot. Mira watched the preparations with solemn curiosity. "Are you going to eat with Uncle Darius and the statue lady?" "I am." "Will you tell me everything afterward?" "Everything I'm allowed to tell." Mira nodded, satisfied. Serafina descended the grand staircase alone, pulse loud in her ears. The dining hall had been transformed since her arrival. The long mahogany table was set with silver and crystal. Candles burned in tall holders despite the daylight. Fresh flowers, hothouse roses in deep crimson, stood in crystal vases. At the head sat Darius, dressed in severe black, his expression unreadable. To his right sat Lady Kale, radiant in pearl-gray silk, a single sapphire pendant resting against her collarbone. Both looked up as Serafina entered. Darius rose. Lady Kale remained seated. "Miss Valtieri," he said. "Thank you for joining us." Serafina curtsied. "My lord." Lady Kale. The lady inclined her head, a movement so slight it bordered on insult. "Sit," Darius said, indicating the chair to his left. Serafina obeyed, acutely aware of the distance between them, barely 2 feet of polished wood, and the vast gulf of propriety that separated her from the woman opposite. The meal began in silence broken only by the soft clink of silver. Soup, creamy chestnut, followed by poached salmon with dill sauce, then quail in red wine reduction. Serafina ate sparingly, every bite mechanical. Lady Kale spoke first. "So you are the new governess," she said, voice musical etched. "Mira seems improved." "She is a bright child," Serafina answered evenly. "Indeed. Though I confess I was surprised to find the position filled so quickly after poor Miss Harrow's departure." "Miss Harrow preferred recitation to thought," Darius said quietly. "Miss Valtieri does not." Lady Kale's smile was perfect, practiced. "How progressive." Serafina met her gaze. "Progress is rarely comfortable, my lady." A flicker of something, annoyance, crossed the lady's face. Darius intervened smoothly. "Mira has begun reading Eastern mythology. She speaks of dragons constantly." "How charming," Lady Kale said. "Though one wonders if such fanciful tales are appropriate for a child of her station." "They are appropriate for any child who has lost her mother," Serafina said before she could stop herself. The silence that followed was brittle. Lady Kale set down her fork. "You speak with surprising authority, Miss Valtieri." "I speak from experience." Darius's hand tightened around his wineglass. Lady Kale smiled again, this time thin, sharp. "How fortunate Mira is to have such personal attention." The implication hung in the air. Serafina felt heat rise in her throat. Darius spoke before she could reply. "Miss Valtieri's methods are effective. Mira is thriving. That is all that concerns me." Lady Kale inclined her head. "Of course, cousin. Your judgment is impeccable." The rest of the meal passed in strained civility. When the last course, lemon syllabub, was cleared, Darius rose. "Excuse me. I have correspondence to attend." He left without another word. Lady Kale remained seated. She waited until the door closed behind him. Then she turned to Serafina. "You are clever," she said softly. "But cleverness in a governess is a dangerous thing." Serafina stood. "If you will excuse me, my lady, Mira is waiting." Lady Kale's smile did not reach her eyes. "Of course. Run along." Serafina left the dining hall with her head high, but her hands were trembling. That afternoon she took Mira to the gardens despite the lingering damp. The child chattered about Veres, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around her. Serafina listened with half her mind. The other half replayed every word, every glance, every silence from luncheon. When they returned to the nursery, a note waited on the writing desk, folded, sealed with black wax, unmarked. Serafina broke the seal. "Library. 10 o'clock. No signature." She stared at the words until the ink blurred. At 10 minutes to 10 she kissed Mira good night, dimmed the lamp, and slipped from the nursery. The corridors were dark, lit only by wall sconces burning low. She moved quietly, heart loud in her ears. The library doors stood ajar. She pushed them open. Darius stood at the fireplace, one hand braced on the mantel, staring into the flames. He had changed into a dark gray dressing gown over shirt and trousers. His hair was damp, as though he had bathed recently. He did not turn. "You came. You asked." He exhaled slowly. Lady Kale will be here for a fortnight. She is assessing the situation. Serafina stepped closer. What situation? He turned then. His face was shadowed, but his eyes caught the firelight, dark, intense, unguarded for the first time. The situation in which my ward is thriving under the care of a woman I cannot seem to stop thinking about. The words landed like stones in still water. Serafina felt the air leave her lungs. Darius. He crossed the distance in 2 strides. He stopped just short of touching her. I have spent years building walls, he said, voice rough. Ledgers, calculations, distance. And then you walked into this house and began dismantling them without even trying. I never intended. I know. He lifted a hand, hesitated, then brushed his knuckles along her cheek, light, reverent. I am trying to be honorable, he said. I am trying to remember what is due to my name, to Mira, to the estate. But every time I look at you I forget every reason I ever had for staying away. Serafina closed her eyes at the touch. I am a governess, she whispered. I have nothing to offer but stories and loyalty. You offer more than that, he said. You offer truth. And I have spent too long running from truth. He dropped his hand. But Lady Kale is here because my solicitor believes a strategic marriage would stabilize the estate. 30,000 a year. Ancient connections. She is suitable. Serafina felt something cold coil in her chest. And you are considering it? I am considering what I must do to protect what is mine. She looked up at him. And what about what you want? He laughed short, bitter. I stopped asking myself that question years ago. Then ask it now. His gaze searched hers. I want you, he said simply. I want the woman who tells my niece dragon stories and corrects my spelling and looks at me as though I am a man, not a title. But wanting is not the same as having. Serafina took a breath. Then let me make it simple for you, she said. I will not be your mistress. I will not stand by while you marry for ledgers. If you choose Lady Kale, I will stay until Mira no longer needs me and then I will leave. Quietly. Cleanly. His jaw tightened. And if I choose you? The question hung between them. Serafina felt tears burn behind her eyes. Then you must be prepared to lose everything you think you need, she said. Because I will never be suitable. Not in their eyes. Not in the eyes of society. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. I am tired of being suitable, he said. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw the war inside him. Duty against desire, legacy against longing. Then, slowly he lowered his head. Their lips met, soft at first, tentative, a question. She answered. Her hands rose to his shoulders. His arms came around her waist. The kiss deepened, grew hungry, desperate, years of restraint unraveling in the space of heartbeats. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. He rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything, he whispered. I know. He kissed her again, gentler this time, lingering. We have 2 weeks, he said against her mouth. 2 weeks before she expects an answer. 2 weeks before the world demands I choose. Serafina nodded. Then we use them, she said. He pulled back just enough to see her face. For Mira? For Mira, she agreed. And for us. Outside, the wind sighed against the windows. Inside, the fire burned steady and bright. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the veil of deception that had shrouded Ravencrest began at last to tear. The fortnight that followed felt like walking a blade's edge in the dark. Serafina and Darius moved through the days with exquisite caution. Polite nods in corridors, brief conversations about Myra's progress in the presence of others, nothing that could be remarked upon by servants or by Lady Kale. Yet every glance carried weight, every accidental brush of fingers and passing sent sparks along her skin. The library became their unspoken refuge. After 10 o'clock, when the house slept, one of them would leave the door ajar. Sometimes they spoke in whispers for hours. About Mira, about the estate's failing west fields, about the eastern tales that had once belonged to Darius's mother. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, firelight painting their faces, hands inches apart on the arm of the same chair. They did not kiss again. Not yet. The restraint was agony and necessity in equal measure. Lady Kale, however, was not idle. She glided through Ravencrest like a swan on black water, serene on the surface, propelling herself with ruthless precision beneath. She took tea with Darius each afternoon in the Rose Salon, discussing crop yields and tenant rents as though she were already mistress. She walked the gardens with Mira, asking careful questions about lessons, smiling when the child mentioned dragons, then murmuring to Darius later that imaginative fancies might need tempering before the girl's formal presentation to society. Seraphina watched it all from the edges, stomach tight. On the 28th day the fracture came. It began with a letter delivered at breakfast. Mrs. Calder placed the thick cream envelope before Darius with a faint grimace. The seal was black wax, impressed with the Kale falcon. Lady Kale watched him open it, her expression serene. Darius read in silence. His jaw tightened. He folded the letter with deliberate care and placed it beside his plate. "Seraphina," he said, voice level, a word after breakfast. Lady Kale's smile was small, satisfied. In the library, door closed, he handed her the letter without preamble. Seraphina scanned the elegant script. It was from Darius's solicitor in Eldenport. The Westfields had flooded again, worse than last year. 2 tenant families had lost their cottages. The spring planting would be delayed, perhaps ruined. The estate's reserves were nearly exhausted. Without new capital, significant capital, the manor itself might need to be mortgaged by autumn. The final paragraph was blunt. A union with Lady Kale would secure the necessary 30,000 per annum. Her father has already indicated willingness to advance half upon betrothal. Delay risks foreclosure proceedings. Seraphina folded the letter. Her hands did not shake. "You knew this was coming," she said quietly. "I hoped it would not come so soon." She looked up at him. "And now?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Lady Kale has offered to speak with her father today. She believes an announcement before the end of her stay would satisfy the creditors." The words landed like stones. Seraphina felt something inside her crack, cleanly, painfully. "Then you must do it," she said. Darius stared at her. "You would have me marry her. I would have you save your home. Save Myra's future. Save the people who depend on this land." His voice dropped. "And you?" "I am a governess," she said, forcing the words past the ache in her throat. "I have always known my place." He stepped toward her. "That is not what you said the night of the storm. The night of the storm we were both pretending the world could bend." He reached for her. She stepped back. "Don't, Seraphina. If you touch me now, I will not be able to leave this room with dignity." He dropped his hand. The silence was unbearable. Then, very quietly, "I cannot lose you." "You are not losing me," she said. "You are choosing what must be chosen. That is not loss. That is duty." His eyes blazed. "I am tired of duty." "Then be tired," she whispered. "But do not let it destroy you." She turned to the door. He caught her wrist, gently but firm enough to stop her. "Stay," he said. "Just tonight. Let me think." She looked at his hand on her wrist, then at his face. The longing there nearly undid her. She pulled free. "I cannot," she said. "Not while she waits downstairs for your answer." She left him standing alone in the firelight. That evening, after Mira was asleep, Seraphina packed her trunk. She moved quietly, methodically, books, dresses, the small wooden box of Lyrian's letters. Each item felt heavier than it should. She wrote 2 notes. The first to Mira. "My dearest dragon tamer, I must go away for a little while. I will think of you every day and tell Varys to watch over you until I return. Be brave. Read the stories. Know that you are loved beyond measure. Sarah." The second to Darius. "I have taken the midnight coach to Eldenport. From there I will travel to Port Vera to be with Lyrian. Do what you must for Ravencrest. Do not look for me. Thank you for the days I was allowed to believe in more. Seraphina." She left both notes on her pillow. At 11:30 she slipped down the servant's stair, cloak over her shoulders, small valise in hand. The kitchen yard was dark. The coach waited at the gate, a hired vehicle she had arranged 2 days earlier, when the first whispers of flooding reached the servants' hall. The driver touched his cap. She climbed inside without looking back. The carriage moved off, wheels crunching over gravel, then turning onto the main road. Inside, Seraphina pressed her forehead to the cold glass. Tears came then, silent, unstoppable. She let them fall. Behind her, Ravencrest Manor receded into the night, lights winking out one by one, like stars going dark. In the library, Darius found the second note at dawn. He read it once, then again. The paper crumpled in his fist. He crossed to the window and stared at the empty drive. Lady Kale found him there an hour later. She saw his face and understood. She did not smile. Instead she said very softly, "You are making a mistake." He turned to her. "No," he said. "I made the mistake when I let her walk away." He left the room without another word. The alliance was fractured. Now only ruin or redemption remained. The night pressed in on Seraphina like a living thing. Every corridor of the estate felt longer than before, every whisper heavier. The crowd had dispersed, but their judgment lingered, etched into walls, stitched into silence. Doors that once opened to her now closed gently, politely, decisively. No accusations were spoken aloud anymore. They didn't need to be. Seraphina stood alone in the antechamber, staring at her reflection in a darkened mirror. The woman staring back looked unchanged, yet everything was different. Her name now carried weight she hadn't chosen. Motives she never claimed. Stories she never told. The Duke's words echoed relentlessly, "Too late." For the first time, fear did not come from the crowd, but from within. What if they were right? What if the narrative had already won? Every path forward seemed blocked by expectation, power, and a truth she no longer controlled. She pressed her palm against the glass, breath shallow, heart heavy. This was the abyss, not dramatic, not loud, but quiet, suffocating doubt. And standing at its edge, Seraphina wondered if there was any version of herself left untouched by what had happened. Resolve did not arrive as fire. It came as memory. Seraphina remembered who she had been before the chandeliers, before the murmurs, before her name became spectacle. She remembered her choices, her restraint, her values, things no crowd could erase unless she allowed it. The realization struck slowly but firmly. Silence had been mistaken for weakness. If the world had already decided who she was, then retreat would only confirm the lie. There was no undoing what had happened, but there was a way forward. When she stepped back into the light, it was not to plead, nor to explain. It was to stand. The choice she made was irreversible. She would not disappear quietly. She would not surrender her story to others. Whether she was believed or not no longer mattered. What mattered was that she would speak with clarity and act with purpose. Something steady ignited in her chest. Not hope yet, but courage. The reckoning did not come gently. It arrived in a chamber filled once more, voices raised, tension sharp, eyes fixed. The Duke stood at the center of it all, authority unchallenged, expression unreadable. The court expected submission. They had rehearsed this outcome in their minds. Seraphina gave them none of it. She met accusation with composure, suspicion with truth. Where they expected collapse, she offered resolve. Her words did not beg. They cut, precise and measured, dismantling assumptions one by one. The storm turned. Murmurs shifted direction. Allies emerged where none were expected. What had seemed like an unbreakable narrative began to fracture under the weight of her certainty. And when the moment came, when silence fell and all eyes waited, Seraphina did not look to the Duke. She looked forward. The triumph was not loud. There was no applause. But the power dynamic had changed. The story was no longer being told about her. She was telling it herself. Morning light touched the estate differently. Where shadows once gathered, warmth settled. The tension that had ruled every exchange softened into something quieter. Acceptance, perhaps, or respect earned the hard way. Seraphina stood at the balcony as the city stirred below. Her life was not restored to what it had been, but it was no longer ruled by fear. The bonds formed in crisis remained, reshaped by honesty and choice rather than pressure. She had grown. Not because she had been forced to, but because she had refused to disappear. The future ahead was uncertain, yes, but it belonged to her again. And in that ownership was peace. Not perfect joy. Not fantasy. But something far stronger. Fulfillment.